One of my, okay. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint. Oh, and you should be able to see a transcript now if you choose to do that. Is that working? The transcript is going?
It's working.
There we go. Okay, so as we get started here, I just want to do a couple quick housekeeping things. So we do have an ASL interpreter if you need those services. You can see on the screen ASL interpreter Amy. I think I can pin her to the top. So you can use that if you would like. We are going to have everyone stay muted for the time being. We would like to have time at the end for questions. So if you can hold your questions to the end, my guess is a lot of times questions get answered as we go through the PowerPoint. Feel free to put it in the chat though, if you're afraid you're going to forget like I probably would, or write it down, but we'll take those at the end. And so we're going to go ahead and dive right in. There is a lot to talk about with this upcoming election coming up August 9th. Ooh. There we go. Just need a minute here because I'm also trying to let people in from the waiting room. Okay, sorry, it's a little awkward. Okay, so the Disability Vote Coalition is a nonpartisan effort that we put into effect many years ago, and it's really to make sure that people with disabilities understand the voting process and that they know the importance of voting, how to register and cast a vote and know what their rights are, and try to increase the number of people with disabilities voting because they are certainly underrepresented at the polls. So the coalition is coordinated by the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, which is the agency I work for, and Disability Rights Wisconsin. And Barbara Beckert is on. She's stopped in for a little bit, and she is my counterpart at DRW. And then we coordinate it, but then we have lots of other really great agencies that are part of the coalition, such as the League of Women Voters that Eileen is with. We have independent living centers that are part of it, NAMI, aging agencies that are part of it. And we also have individuals with disabilities. You know, whoever's really passionate about voting is welcome to be part of our coalition. So if any of you are really excited by this and you want to be part of the coalition, we invite you to join us. There we go. So a little bit about the disability vote. According to the American Association of People with Disabilities, 23% of the electorate in November 2020 were people with some sort of disability. So, you know, about 1 in 4 people, that's a big number. That's a large group. And we're talking about all disabilities that are represented there: sensory, like hearing and visual, intellectual and developmental, like autism, Down syndrome, physical disabilities, mental health, complex, ongoing chronic health conditions. It's a big group of people. And then we also try to do a lot of work with older adults that have disabilities or acquire a disability just through the normal aging process. And we found that a lot of people through the aging process that experience some conditions that we might consider disabilities don't often identify themselves as having a disability. But certainly the information we provide is very relevant for them. We also know, again, people are underrepresented, and that if people with disabilities voted at the same rate as people without disabilities, that would be 2.35 million more voters, which there's a lot of power in that statement. If we can get more people with disabilities voting and increase that voter block, and that's going to change any election, any day, anywhere. So that's our mission, to get more people voting at the polls. So we just want to take a look ahead. The next election coming up is a partisan primary on August 9th. So I already received my absentee ballot over the weekend. So if you request absentee, they're already coming out. The biggest thing that people need to know about a partisan primary, because they don't happen often, is that means you can only vote in one party. So you have to choose the party that you want, and you can only vote for candidates in that party. If you did vote for a candidate in a different party, your vote's not going to count. So it's really important people are aware that just for this election in August, you have to pick a party and stick to that party. You don't have to be an official member of that party or anything like that. You just, on the ballot, the first thing they ask is what party. There's 4 on my ballot. It was like Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, and I think it's Constitution Party. So just pick one and make sure you follow those directions very carefully. If there isn't somebody in every election or office, you can always write in somebody. That's an opportunity in any election. You can write in the candidate of your choosing, and if there isn't a candidate, you can skip that. So here we just have really important dates for you to be aware of. You don't have to remember all these, but just be aware that there are some deadlines for registering that are going to be coming up quick. So you can register online or by mail by July 20th. You can register in person at your clerk's office until August 5th. And Wisconsin is fortunate. You can register on election day. So you could register on your polling place on election day, which is a nice opportunity that a lot of states don't have. And then the election after that, this one will sort of narrow the field for November 8th. And again, we put the deadlines there just for you to be aware of. So if you're working with people, they know there are important deadlines to follow. Ballot, there's a lot. A lot of people kind of skip primaries, but this is a really important one. So the governor, finalizing who's going to be running for governor is on this ballot, lieutenant governor, attorney general, state treasurer, secretary of state. There is a U.S. senator race, and there are a lot of candidates running for that office that would be running against Ron Johnson. And we're going to be in the next couple elections looking at state senators in the odd number districts. All the state representatives are up for re-election, and all of our 8 congressional representatives in Washington. So there's a lot at stake, a lot going on. So this is one where I feel like people really need to do their research on candidates, because there are multiple candidates. So you really need to put in the time to figure out which candidates, meet your values and priorities best. So let's talk about voter eligibility. So this is some basic stuff, and sometimes a lot of you on here are working with people with disabilities as well, so it's information important for you to pass on. But if you're eligible to vote, you must be a U.S. citizen. You have to be at least 18 years old on or before Election Day. You have to have lived in the state for at least 28 days prior to the election. You can't currently be serving a sentence or on probation, parole, or something like that. So that's called being on paper. If you're on paper, you wouldn't be eligible to vote. But once you're off paper, you are able to do that. And that's an area that we've been looking at too through the Disability Vote Coalition. A lot of people with disabilities end up incarcerated. And sometimes there's a fear of voting after they're off paper, because if you vote when you're not supposed to, you could go back to jail. So we're trying to do a lot more education around that as well, knowing when people can get their right to vote back. And then, of course, you can't have been determined by a court to be ineligible to vote. Typically, we're talking about guardianship. So if somebody has guardianship and that right was removed, you cannot vote. Who needs to register? Obviously, a first-time voter. If you've moved, you need to register. If you've changed your name for any reason, like getting married or something. And if you haven't voted in over 4 years, you'll need to re-register. But one thing that we tell people is just check your registration, and we're going to show you how to do that in just a minute, just to be sure. I think that's just best practice. Here you go, checking your registration status. So you go to myvotewisconsin.gov. If you've never visited this website, I really strongly encourage you to take a look at it after this presentation. Everything you need to know about voting is right there. And if you have easy access to a computer, this is the place to be. I love this website. So you just go to My Vote, you click on register to vote. You can kind of see in that black bar up there, there's different things you can do. And then all you have to do to find out is put in your name and birth date. And it will tell you if you're registered. If you are, you'll have a chance to update your name and address. And if you're not, it will walk you through the steps to get registered. There are 5 ways to register to vote online. For most people, it's the easiest. You will need a photo ID to do that. And like I said, you have to do that up to 20 days before the election. That's where these deadlines come into play here. You can mail in a paper registration form, again, up to 20 days before the election, and you mail it to your municipal clerk. If you don't know who your municipal clerk is, My Vote Wisconsin is another place to find that out. There's a place to click who is my clerk. You can also do this in person. So you can take your registration form to the municipal clerk's office through the Friday before the election and bring proof of residence. Eileen will talk about what is acceptable proof of residence. You can register at your polling place on election day. And again, you'll need your proof of residence and your photo ID because we require photo ID to vote. And for anybody out there, if you live or work with someone in a care facility, they can register to vote through special voting deputies, which are people that can come into the facility. I think it's 5 beds or more are eligible for that. So those are a little more unique situations. Like nursing homes often do that. They'll have special voting deputies come in. So those are the 5 ways to register. And I believe Eileen is up next.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. Hi, everyone. This is Eileen. And I'm happy to kind of take the baton and continue to talk about the registration process. So what you need in order to register to vote depends on which pathway you're going to use. So if you're going to register to vote online, all you need is your Wisconsin driver's license or ID card. And you'll fill in the different forms online, and we'll walk through that kind of step by step here in a moment. But if you're going to use the paper form in order to register to vote, like if you want to mail it into your clerk's office, if you're going to be registering to vote in person, what you're going to need is an acceptable proof of residence document. And then you're also going to need your Wisconsin driver's license or state ID number, or the last 4 digits of your social security number if you don't have a Wisconsin ID. And this isn't necessarily like an either or. It's really a hierarchy. So if you have been issued a Wisconsin driver's license or state ID, that's the number that you're going to need. You can't just substitute it with the last 4 digits of your social security number because you don't have it on you at the time. But you can call and get it. So, and there's plenty of help to help find that number if you need help finding that number. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, if you're going to use the paper registration form to register either by mail or in person, you're going to need to have a proof of residence document. This document needs to have your name and current residential address on it. It's going to be used to prove that you reside where you say that you reside. It can be paper or electronic. Some common items that people use are their Wisconsin driver's license or state ID card if the address is up to date on it. A utility bill, like a water bill, internet, electricity, any utility bill. You can use a credit card statement, a bank statement, and there's a whole bunch of different options. And we do have the link here to where you can find the list of options on the MyVote website. And I do want to also just mention that there's a really broad category for acceptable proof of residence document that includes any document that's been issued by a government entity. So this could be a hunting license. Could be your library card from your public library. It could be your vehicle registration. It could even be a letter from your municipal clerk that has your current, your name and your current address on it as well. So if you don't have an option, your clerk is a really good person to reach out to kind of figure out what would work best for you. Next slide, please. And then here's just an image to kind of show this information in another way. Here are some common proof of residence options. This isn't the exhaustive list of all the options, but maybe there's something on here that resonates with you. That you're like, oh yeah, okay, I do have a utility bill, or oh yeah, I do have a bank statement. This is what I can use in order to register to vote. Next slide, please. And then we did want to make sure to kind of walk you through what the registration form looks like. So when you go to register, it's not the first time you've ever seen it before. This is the top half of the first page, and it has several different boxes that kind of walk you through the process. So step one is qualifications. Jenny went over those earlier in the presentation. Box two is your name. Box three is about you. They want your date of birth, phone number, email address, so that they can follow up with you if there's any issues with your registration. But I do want to note that those pieces of information are optional to provide. Box four is about the address of where you live. So do give the address that is your physical address rather than a PO box, because box five is for your mailing address. So if you have a mailing address that's different from your residential address, that's where you would put that information. Next slide, please. And then this is the lower half of the registration form. If you have been registered at a previous location or under a previous name, it is really helpful for your clerk to have that information. So that's what they're asking for in box 6. In box 7, they're looking for your Wisconsin driver's license or state ID number and the expiration date. Or if you do not have one, that's where they're looking for your social security number, the last 4 digits of your social security number. And then if you've never been issued either one of those, they do have the option for you to check the box saying that you don't have either number. Box 8 is just a really helpful reminder to include a proof of residence document along with your registration form. It gives you some ideas of examples of things that you can use. And then box 9 is where you sign and certify that you completed the form correctly, that you're qualified to vote. And so you would sign there and put the date on there as well. And then box 10 is for if you've had assistance completing the form. So having someone help you walk through the form does not constitute assistance where they would need to sign. But if somebody helped you by filling out the form for you, this is where they would make that known and they would sign and put their address on the form. Next slide, please. And then on page 2 of the form, or sometimes if it's a double-sided page, it would be the back side of the page. They do have space for you to mark your address if you have a non-traditional address. So for example, if you're a homeless voter and you don't have a number address, but you typically are at the cross streets of street A and street B, you can mark it on there. And then along with your letter from a service provider, this can help them identify where your residence is for voting purposes. And then I do also want to note that on page 2 of the form, there's a space for you to request any accommodations at your polling place. Your polling place should be prepared to give you any reasonable accommodations, but sometimes it can be helpful just for them to be aware of something that you might need, whether it's curbside voting or signature guide. That way they can make sure that they have trained up their poll workers to assist you when you come and vote. And then there's also a checkbox for you to indicate if you're interested in being a poll worker. This is a really great way to be involved in our democracy beyond just voting. And so I really encourage anybody who's interested in taking that next step in being a poll worker to do so. And we know that the folks in the disability community have, really good experience and can be strong advocates to make sure that polling places are truly accessible for everyone. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. I just want to mention we're also working to make sure that we get more people with disabilities themselves as poll workers.
Great, thanks, Jenny. And then we do want to walk through the online voter registration process as well. So as Jenny mentioned earlier, this is what the homepage of the myvote.wi.gov website looks like. There's a lot of different things you can do on this website. And one of them is registering to vote. So we'll walk through what that process looks like. Next slide, please. So if you click on register to vote, the first thing you're going to have to do is type in your first name, last name, and date of birth and click search. If you have not previously been registered to vote in Wisconsin, it'll say, sorry, we can't find your record. Do you want to register to vote? You can click that red button in the center of the screen in order to register to vote. Next slide, please.
I wonder if it would make sense here. I mean, there was somebody who said they got this message, and then someone else said they got it once and called their municipal clerk. I'm assuming they are registered.
Sure.
Still got that.
So if you're registered to vote and you're having trouble finding your record by searching your name, your first name, last name, date of birth, it could be because of maybe there's a typo in your name, or maybe if you go by a nickname, when you if you have a nickname, maybe you typed in your nickname as your first name rather than your full name, or maybe when you filled out the registration previously, you used your nickname rather than your full name. That could just be a kind of a mismatch in the way that the record was entered. What you can do is you can try a couple of variations of your name, and if that pulls it up, then you can move forward. But if you're having an issue finding your record, if you're already registered to vote, definitely encourage you to contact your municipal clerk. I think that's the right thing to do and see what is going on here. There is the button, or there is a link on this page to find your municipal clerk's contact information. And so you can easily call them or send them a quick email to figure out what's going on. But let's say that you are registering to vote for the first time here in Wisconsin, and this is what the next screen will look like, and it's going to walk you through the different things that we just walked through on the paper form, but electronically. So you're going to be prompted to verify that you're eligible to vote, put in your name and address. You're going to review all the information, and then at the end, you're going to click, I think the button says submit, but it may be like next or continue, and then go through the online registration process. Next slide, please. Okay, and then I would be remiss if I did not review Wisconsin's photo ID requirement for voting. So here in Wisconsin, voters are required to show a photo ID in order to get a ballot. There are a few exceptions. For example, for indefinitely confined voters, and these are voters who would have difficulty getting to the polls due to age, illness, disability, or I think infirmity. It's the way that the language is in the statute. And so those folks don't need to provide a photo ID, but most people need to provide a photo ID. It's important to know that your photo ID does not have to have your current address on it. The purpose of the photo ID is to prove that you are the person that you say you are. So they're looking at, does your name resemble what's on the poll book? Does your face reasonably resemble the picture that's on the photo ID? They're not looking to confirm your address at that point. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the options that you can use for a photo ID. Some of the most common ones that people use are Wisconsin driver's license, a passport. Students can use their university or college ID if it is compliant. There are certain requirements for it to be considered an acceptable photo ID for voting purposes. But there are several other options as well. And there is help out there. So if you are not sure if you have an ID that's acceptable, reach out to Jenny, reach out to me. We can get you assistance in navigating this process. Next slide, please. And I do just want to pause here and kind of review this graphic that I have on the screen. I think sometimes people get confused about the difference between proof of residence and photo ID. And so both of these documents are part of the voting process here in Wisconsin, but they serve two different purposes. So just to kind of give a quick overview, the proof of residence document is what people use when they're registering to vote. And this document basically serves to prove that the voter lives where they say that they live. So it has to have their address on it and their current and their name on it. And it can be shown either in a physical copy or electronic version. Some common options are utility bill, driver's license, pay stub, credit card bill. There's a lot of different, we reviewed some of the options. And then the photo ID is what people use in order to get their ballot. And so this is the document that proves that you are who you say that you are. And again, some common options are the passport, driver's license, or state ID, veterans or military ID. And again, this does not need to have your current address on it because they're not verifying where you live at this point in the voting process. Next slide, please. So one of the big challenges that came up when the photo ID law was implemented in Wisconsin was that there's a whole population of people who don't have an ID that was on the acceptable list. And so to make sure that there's not like a poll tax or like a de facto poll tax in order to vote, the state did implement a process for people to get a free ID for voting purposes. And so people can get a free photo ID from the Department of Motor Vehicles, so the DMV. And if you need help, the DMV has a voter ID hotline. You can go in person, they can walk you through it. There's other organizations like the Wisconsin Voter ID Coalition who can help. And if you need somebody to go with you to the DMV to walk through the process, they're more than happy to help with that sort of thing. And so we know that there are a lot of people who don't necessarily have all the required documentation in order to get kind of the traditional ID, so a driver's license or a regular state ID card. And so the state also has the ID petition process. And this is where somebody who does not have all the required documents, they can go through this process And it's actually on the DMV to help track down those documents so that the person can get an ID that they can use in order to vote while the DMV is tracking down the required documents for a more permanent ID. Next slide, please. Okay, and then wanted to cover some information about the absentee voting process. So since the pandemic, a lot more people are giving the absentee voting process another look. It's more popular than it has ever been. And I personally find it to be pretty easy and convenient. And it's important to know that anyone in Wisconsin can request an absentee ballot, no excuses needed. I did talk about the indefinitely confined provision. So people who are indefinitely confined, meaning they have a difficult time getting to the polls due to age, illness, infirmity, or disability, can request an absentee ballot to be sent to them automatically for each election. So this can be a really great option for people who meet that qualification. It's important to, kind of plan ahead. The deadline to request an absentee ballot for the upcoming primary is August 4th, but we recommend requesting one at least 2 weeks in advance of the election to ensure it has enough time to get to you, for you to fill it out, and to return it and make sure that it is counted. The deadline for absentee ballots to be received is on election day at 8 p.m. But the United States Postal Service recommends that you mail it back at least 1 week in advance to ensure that it arrives on time. And also, as part of your planning ahead process, think about if you're going to need assistance completing your ballot and who will assist you. And also think about who your witness is going to be. And we'll review the witness process or the witness requirements here in a second. Next slide, please. So kind of like with the registration process, you have options for how to request an absentee ballot. One of the easiest ways is to request it online at the myvote.wi.gov website. Note the first time you request an absentee ballot, you are going to need to upload a copy of your photo ID. One of the easiest ways to do this is if you actually use your smartphone to go to that website, and then you can just take a photo of your ID and upload it onto the website, so then it gets sent to your municipal clerk. But you can also request an absentee ballot in writing by mail or by email. There is an application for an absentee ballot that the Wisconsin Elections Commission has put together. It's helpful to use this because if you fill out all the sections, that makes sure that you give your clerk all the information that they need in order to fulfill your request. But really the requirement is that you make your request in writing. So you need to have your full name, your voting address, the election that you want your ballot for, or if you want to request it for the whole calendar year, you can do that all at the same time with one request. If you want your ballot mailed to a different address, make that known in your request. And then if you need to supply a copy of your photo ID, if it's the first time you're requesting an absentee ballot, make sure to include that or include a copy of that in your request. And then the other option is to request an absentee ballot in person. So people often call this early voting. It's technically called in-person absentee voting here in Wisconsin, but in the 2 weeks before election day, you can go and do in-person absentee voting at your clerk's office or at their designated location. And the locations and hours vary by municipality. So you'll just have to check in with your municipal clerk's office to see where and when you can request an absentee ballot in person. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to get into the requirements for a witness. So when you vote absentee, you do have to have a witness who is there while you're voting. They're not there to see who you're voting for, but they are there to be able to verify that you are the person who is filling out your ballot. You'll complete the ballot in front of them, put it in the envelope. You'll sign the certificate. They'll need to sign the certificate as well, and include their address on it. Make sure that your witness includes their signature and address on your absentee ballot certificate, because if they miss this step, your clerk will do their best to follow up with you, but there's no, if it doesn't get filled in before election day, your vote will not count. So absentee voting is really convenient, but you do have to be careful to follow the specific steps in order to make sure that your vote is counted. And then if you have an assister help you complete your ballot, this is like if they're helping you physically fill in the bubbles, there is a spot on there where they will need to sign and date it as well. Next slide, please. So what we have found with the increase in absentee voting is that there are people who live alone and they have trouble finding a witness. So it is helpful to kind of walk through what are the qualifications for a witness for your absentee ballot. They must be a U.S. citizen over 18 years of age. It can be a friend, it could be a spouse, a neighbor, a family member, a care worker. I've heard of people going to the grocery store and asking the checkout person to be their witness. So people can get pretty creative if they need help. Again, this is a way that the Disability Vote Coalition can be helpful. If you need help kind of thinking through this process, please do feel free to call the hotline and we can help provide some assistance in kind of walking through what options are. It's also important to know that some communities offer drop-off locations and that are staffed and have somebody there who can witness your ballot. If this is something that you want to look into, I would recommend calling your municipal clerk and just finding out what the options are in your community. And again, if you need help identifying somebody to be your witness, you have resources. You can call us, you can call your municipal clerk, and there are people out there who are looking to provide help if it's needed. And then I think my last slide here is to just talk about how do I know if my ballot has been received. And one of the beautiful things that's on the My Vote Wisconsin website is the absentee ballot tracker. And so you can see when your absentee ballot request has been approved, when it was sent to you, when the anticipated delivery date, and then also once you mail it back to your clerk, they will also include a box on here saying that they received it. And you can check the status leading up to the election, and then also after the election to see if your ballot was successfully counted as well. With that, I'll pass it back to Jenny.
Thank you, Eileen. Give you a break here. Okay, so we're going to switch over to voting in person and some things to think about. We recommend that people check their polling places, especially, when the pandemic hit. A lot of polling places got consolidated and it's calmed down a little bit, but we still recommend checking your polling places. We have gotten calls on our hotline of people who showed up and thought they were at the right place and they weren't. And if you already have transportation issues, you just want to make sure you're in the right place. So you can check that on the My Vote website or by calling your municipal clerk. Previewing your ballot is my absolute favorite option on the My Vote website. I never vote without going to what's on my ballot. You put in your name and address and you get exactly what your ballot's going to look like. So there's no surprises where you show up and you're like, oh, I didn't know that was on the ballot and I don't know who these people are and now I don't know how to vote. So I always check that so I can do my research and be prepared. Again, checking your voter registration status. tell your friends. We just think that's a best practice. Knowing your rights, we're going to run through what your rights are for people with disabilities. Curbside voting, we recommend that you call ahead. That is a great option for people who especially maybe are like immunocompromised, maybe have COVID, and other disability conditions that make it a little more difficult to vote in the polling place, but they don't want to vote absentee. And I've got a little more detail on that in a minute. Certainly planning ahead for transportation. For a lot of us, we really have to think about how are we going to get there and back if we vote in person. And a lot of people really do want to vote in person. It's just different than voting absentee. And a lot more people are going back to that now that things have calmed down a little bit. And then don't forget to bring your photo ID. I always tell people shortly after the law changed, I talk to people about this all the time. I specifically looked at my wallet and I wasn't driving, so I'm like, I don't need that. And we got all the way there, like, I do need my photo ID, and I had to go home and get it. So bring your photo ID. If you do have any problems, questions, complaints, and the one thing I hope you remember out of this whole hour is this phone number. Any problem with voting and disability issues, call that DRW voter hotline. We will get back to you quickly, and it is staffed live on election days. So you've got the number there, and that's also 844-DISVOTE. So getting there, talking about transportation, independent living centers are a really great resource to find out what some options are, as well as the Aging and Disability Resource Center. There's a phone number there that is a statewide number where you can get help with that. You might have to be more flexible with going with a neighbor or a friend or a family member. Maybe your faith community has options that you can check out, or other groups that you're part of. We do have a fact sheet available on our website that you can download that gives you other ideas for how to get there. The big guardianship question. So some people have a guardian and have retained their right to vote, even though someone has guardianship over them. Sometimes that's not the case. And what I really want to point out here is nobody gets to make that determination about your right to vote except a court of law. So the judge decides. Family members do not decide. Poll workers do not get to decide just by looking at you walking in if you can vote or not. Only a judge can remove that right. If you're not sure, and a lot of people aren't, there is a form, a really long name, determination and order on petition for guardianship due to incompetency. That form will tell you if you have that right or not. So if you don't have easy access, or maybe you've lost the form or something like that, you can get it from the probate court in your county. It costs usually a couple dollars to get that. You can also call your municipal clerk because they are supposed to have a list of people who are ineligible to vote. And we want you to know if you are in a situation where you lost the right to vote, you can petition the court to get that right back. And Disability Rights Wisconsin and the DVC are just putting the finishing touches on a step-by-step document on how to do that, and we'll be providing training on it as well in the fall. So it's not too late if that right has been removed, and that's really important to somebody. We have a lot more resources specific to this issue at disabilityvote.org. So that curbside voting, we like to highlight this because we've discovered in our trainings that very few people are aware of it as disability accommodation. It is required by law, so if somebody can't get into their polling place because of a disability, they can vote curbside. Now, polling places are supposed to be accessible, but we also know a lot of polling places are like in church basements that aren't, truly accessible. So it's a great option if you feel that you can't get in to the polling location. You can do the curbside voting. You do not have to prove that you have a disability. You don't need a letter from a doctor. They're not even supposed to ask you if you have a disability, but it's something where you go to the polling place, 2 poll workers will come out and you will vote literally from your car. What we do recommend, though, is you contact your municipal clerk before Election Day, preferably. They're really busy on Election Day. So, before Election Day, ask them how they do curbside voting, because it's very different in every polling location. Sometimes you just honk your horn and people come out. Sometimes you do have to get out and ring a doorbell. Best practice to me is they have a cell phone number listed that you can call. Accessible voting machines, there's a picture of one there. A lot of people with disabilities are not aware of this, and once they've discovered it, they just love it. It's a great way to vote privately and independently, because you actually put headphones on and it reads the ballot to you, and you can make your own choices. So a lot of people who are blind or low vision like this option, instead of having a person read the ballot to them, and then obviously that person's going to know how they voted because they have to tell them which bubble to fill in. You can do it all on your own there. Anybody can use that accessible voting machine, and we really recommend that people do. Give it a try for yourself. It also, the more people that use it, the better. Just make it, just sort of the norm when you go in. Some polling places will say, we also have a machine if you'd like to use that. And we'd like to see more polling places do that. Every polling place is required to have this. And I've never heard of any place that didn't have one, but we do hear that sometimes they're not working right, or somebody had a question and people weren't trained properly, like the poll workers, on how to use them. So we work with municipalities to smooth out those problems when we hear those complaints. Voting rights, I'm going to go kind of quickly, but they're pretty straightforward. You have the right to vote privately and independently, to get into your polling place, to use that accessible voting machine. You can ask for accommodations, and the most common ones are sometimes a chair to sit in if there's a line, a signature guide. So if you're blind or low vision, or your hand isn't steady, it just helps you sign in the right place on the poll book. You can ask for a magnifying glass to see your ballot easier, and assistance stating your name and address. So people who have difficulty speaking, or maybe are deaf and don't speak, there is a requirement. Your name and address has to be said out loud, and it used to be the voter had to do it, but we helped work on a law that said anyone can state that for you. So it could be someone with you, or it could just be the poll worker that says it out loud for you. You do have the right to have someone help actually mark your ballot, except for your employer or union representative. I've been told by people who were turned away, they brought someone with them to help them with the ballot, and the poll worker said, no, you can't do that, and they lost their vote. They didn't know they had that right. So that's why it's so important that we're all familiar with this, so that people can push back and say, no, I have that right, or I need to talk to the chief election inspector about this. You have the right to the curbside voting, to file a complaint. The Wisconsin Election Commission has a process for that. They've made it easier, and they really encourage that, because it's going to help you and it's going to help everyone behind you. So it's really helpful to hear from people when they have a problem. If you make a mistake, a lot of people don't know, you can request another ballot. You can bring a note sheet. So like I said, I check my ballot, and if there's a lot of people on the ballot, I'll even write their names down on a piece of paper. You have a right to bring in that paper with you to fill out your ballot. And most importantly, no one should tell you how to vote. It is your vote, and people should not be persuaded to vote any other way than how they want. So how to be informed. This is one of the biggest areas that we hear from people with disabilities, that they have issues like, how do I find out understandable information about these candidates? It can be a lot of information to go through and try to figure out which candidate meets your needs and values the best. So you can find out on My Vote, again, that what's on your ballot, and then you can go to websites like vote411.org, Ballotpedia, Wisconsin Vote. They have information all in one place where you can get information about candidates on the ballot, and it's sort of all been put together in one place for you. And you can still ask, I always ask family, friends, people I trust, what do you think about this person? Sort of talk through it, but ultimately it's up to you who you choose. And then certainly following the Vote Coalition, we have an e-newsletter you can sign up for. We've got a ton of resources, our website, a very active Facebook page. So those are really great ways to just be in the loop on disability voting issues. What you can do, please share this information with others. That, like I said, the more people that know about this, the better. And the more people with disabilities that vote, the better. You can join the coalition, either that monthly group that meets, or you can just get emails to keep you in the loop. So there's different levels of involvement. We have a toolkit that goes into detail about this. So we don't expect you to remember all the things that we said, but we want you to know where you can go to look up the information. We have postcards and posters and a plan to help you vote that you can download and we can mail to you. So if you're with like an agency or something like that, you can hang up the posters and just make people aware, and you can pass out the postcards that have key websites and the election dates on them. Again, follow us on our social media, talk to your legislators. We're going to have a really amazing opportunity coming up here because there's going to be a lot of change in the legislature. And that's an opportunity for us to develop relationships with our legislators, let them know what our disability issues are, keep them informed, educate them. They can't be expected to know everything about disability. So it's kind of on our shoulders to say, these are the things going on in the disability community that I want you to be aware of. And that really is a relationship that is important to build. So we're going to see a lot of turnover coming up. And then again, the bottom line, the biggest takeaway is to call that number for any kind of assistance, or you can also email us if you prefer that route. Here's all of our resources just on one slide, so I'm not going to go through them all, but it's just a handy slide that you can refer to get, a lot of what we talked about condensed here. And then that number and email again. So we have a few minutes left. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open it up for questions. So there is a phone number here, 715-381-7266. Do you have a question?
Hey, Cindy, it's Lindsay. I just wanted to make sure that the whole PowerPoint will be available after the meeting, because you guys do such a wonderful job. I just want to see if I can get a copy of that PowerPoint.
Yes, I'm going to send the PowerPoint out and just a couple other additional resources this afternoon. So as long as you're registered, which you are if you're here, you'll get a copy of all the resources.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other voting questions that people have? I know that was a lot of information to take in one gulp.
And I just wanted to tell people that if they're under guardianship and don't have the right to vote, they can petition to get that back. So
They can what?
they can petition to get that back. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Because a lot of people didn't know that when, maybe when they went for guardianship, didn't even know that was an option. There are some rights you can retain. Sometimes the judge is fine with that. Sometimes the judge is like, nope, we're taking away all the rights. It depends who you get, and it is up to the judge. Even if the parent maybe says, I want my child to still be able to vote, it's still ultimately up to the judge. And we do have supported decision-making now in our state as a law since 2018, which is just a less restrictive way to, sort of guide a person with a disability without taking away their rights. But, it's still fairly new. A lot of people don't know about it. So there's a lot of people under guardianship that didn't have that option. and are now in this position where voting is important to them, but they can't. So, like I said, that document, Ellen actually is here, is writing that with some other lawyers on, that step, and there she is, on that step-by-step process on how to get that right back. Connie.
Hi. So for petitioning for that right to get it back, do they have to go back to court to have that petition filed, or like how does that process work?
Jenny, do you want me to take that?
I do.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ellen in the Madison DRW office. And yes, to get your right to vote back, if it has been removed by the court, you must go back to court and file a formal legal petition and ask the court to restore your right. You will need to provide evidence at a hearing before the judge or court commissioner, and that evidence might be your own testimony about your understanding of the voting process. It might also include the guardian supporting you and saying their opinion that yes, this person does have an understanding of voting, and other support. But the judge or court commissioner needs to hear the evidence, and you, the person under guardianship, needs to prove that they have the capability to understand the voting process. And the court will then make a decision, in agreement or in disagreement. So it's up to the court.
Yeah, do you know how successful most of those petitions are?
We don't know of very many petitions. Wisconsin doesn't keep data on guardianships, so we don't have an answer for that. We know of successful petitions. Some people have successfully gotten their right to vote restored, but I couldn't tell you how many, and I couldn't tell you what percentage of petitions.
Okay. Thank you, Ellen.
Jenny, we have a question in the chat from Lisa.
Oh, yes.
And Lisa's question looks like it's kind of specifically asking what DRW's position is on this. And I can say that we're part of the Disability Vote Coalition. I'm with the league. Jenny's with the board for people with developmental disabilities. So I certainly do not want to speak on behalf of DRW, but we can at least speak to the question. And the question is, there's a decision pending from the Wisconsin Supreme Court regarding whether or not I can give my ballot to a friend, spouse, caregiver, or to return to the clerk, or have someone walk it out to the mailbox. What's DRW's position on this? And so maybe we can just speak to what the current situation is and what people can do if they find themselves in this situation. And Jenny, I don't know if you want to take it or if you want me to.
I mean, it's not really a situation where we can have an opinion on it. It is what it is. Right now, the decision stands that you cannot have anyone else besides yourself put it in a mailbox or return it to the municipal clerk. You, the voter, has to do it themselves. And we were supposed to hear a decision by the end of the month, so we're, like a day away from that. So we're kind of waiting on pins and needles to hear if the Wisconsin Supreme Court is going to uphold that. We have, though, told people with disabilities, if because of your disability, this is a barrier, call your municipal clerk and see if they will accommodate you. Again, I mean, that local control thing, every municipal clerk is going to have a different opinion and, maybe willingness to provide accommodations, if you will. But legally, as it stands, you cannot have anyone else do that for you right now. And it's creating a huge amount of problem for people with disabilities, older adults who don't drive. So it's a huge concern of ours. We're hoping it will not be upheld, but we're just waiting to see what they say. It also affects drop boxes. It's put a lot more restrictions on drop boxes, so there will be a lot fewer. I think it says that the drop box has to be manned. by a human being to be used, which, you know, there's few drop boxes that are manned like that. So I hope that answers your question, okay? All right, so we are at time. So we will end it here. If you do have a personal question, though, I'm happy to stay on and talk to people. But we really appreciate your time, and please, please, please share these resources and join us if you would like more information on voting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.